Hi guys, welcome to Blackbird. Woo-hoo. So this is our second one for this year, 2021, and today we're going to talk about bias, inherent bias, racial bias. I feel like those two terms are kind of confusing, so we're also going to talk about that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Micah, you got any housekeeping stuff for us?
If you want to talk to Megan, she's on the Facebook. There's a link below. So you can go talk to her and ask her questions or comments or things that you maybe really want to talk about. She is there for you.
I
Uh,
do.
and then we just have some links about implicit bias and the effect on society and I found a couple that were like, does bias training really work? Which is interesting. So that's basically it. Yeah.
Well, cool. Let's dive into bias. So, definition of inherent bias. Anybody who wants to go? What did you guys find?
I think my favorite one was sort of a little bit of an explanation. So your brain is always categorizing things and looking for patterns, finding patterns, and making assumptions about things. Something that's an implicit bias is something you don't consciously think about. It's definitely unconscious, and it's because your brain is making all these connections. The problem is when you get into incorrect assumptions, or you like get stuck in maybe like that racist joke that someone told you once or something that like sticks with you. And I think that was my sort of favorite explanation about it, because everyone has these implicit biases. It's not your fault. It's something you like grow up with and you absorb from your surroundings or maybe your family or whatever.
That was that's the one that I found. Another one that I was like, how is inherent bias not racism? So, and I think you kind of explained it well, and they explain it well too, is that like the difference between like your inherent bias and like racism is one, like it being unconscious, like it's not a choice that you're making, and two, like the emotional attachment that you have for it. So like inherent bias is not necessarily an emotional connection, it's just something your brain has done to group things, whereas racism is an emotional connection. You have an emotional hatred for that group of people. Sorry, I'm sorry, that's my phone. Stop it.
It's me texting you. I didn't know your was on. Sorry. We're good.
We're good. Anyway, Joe, do you find like a definition that is different or interesting or struck you?
Um, I I think all of y'all basically hit the nail on the head there. That you know, it's a it's a biological process of the brain. Whereas categorizing and generalizing. I think one thing is that that can be used in nurturing an inherent bias if you know how to cultivate that. So
Yeah.
you know, where as you were stating, an inherent bias by somebody not realizing it may in turn also be a racial bias,
Right.
but they understand that it is because they've been taught inherently, obviously, that this is the way it is or what have you, and in their circle, it's not been. I guess I read somewhere, what is it? It hasn't been disproven to be wrong information. So
Mm,
like the processing, the subconscious processing of wrong information. So they make a wrong assumption, and in their head, it's not a wrong thing until it's blatantly pointed out to them. But I think the definition that y'all had certainly encompasses everything that it is.
I think that was a really good point because it is wrong information, right? That your brain is working off of with most in most inherent biases when it comes to like race or religion, age, sexism, all of those things. Those inherent biases come from
I
outside,
think,
right? You're not born with
yeah,
those.
I
It's
think that they're maybe wrong when you apply them to people. I
right,
think, yeah, it's maybe a survival tactic for like, which berries are poisonous.
right.
But we extrapolate that. I think that's when it gets problematic is when our brain applies that to judging people. Or
Exactly.
not even, it's not even necessarily a judgment, but yes, applying it to people like this
Yeah.
person.
You know what?
I was,
Just on, I apologize for interrupting. Just in that, like saying which berries are bad or what have you, going back to like where we developed this skill to help us survive or what have you. That would be the same as a. It also applies to people in that context because
hmm
you have different groups competing for the same
Re-
resources for survival as far as food and
right.
following
Yep.
herds and things of that nature. Whereas in today, the resources are political power, oil fields and things of that nature.
hmm
Right.
And they apply it on a racial basis to categorize us. I apologize, Elizabeth. Please
No,
continue.
no, that's fine. That's a really good point, actually. 'Cause yeah, I mean, tribalism is also clearly a big thing still. So, yeah.
And I think it's really important to note that, like in this discussion that we're having about the way our brains are wired, people haven't really changed. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
not a lot of there's a lot of science, and we've discovered lots of new things, but like the way our bodies work essentially haven't changed since the first human. Our brains work the same way. Everything works the same. There have been no like mutations or enhancements among people that that have made us not susceptible to these things that our brains are wired to do from when people first walked the earth. So I think
Mhm.
that's really an important thing to notice and think about. Um, so next, let's talk about, I don't know, what did you learn? What did you find interesting? I forgot what I was going to say.
I was interested in, so like 4 or 5 years ago, I went to a company meeting where we took this implicit bias test. Um, and it was really fascinating, especially people's reactions. Um, and that sort of leads into bias training. And I was sort of interested in if bias training and if being aware of your biases actually helps. And there's not a whole lot of studies on this except the NYPD. And they spent a ton of money and they trained everybody. And the officers do have a better understanding of what bias is, what an implicit bias is, like how to look out for it. But their behavior hasn't really changed as far as arrests. And part of that, I think, is they just went in and trained everyone. And they're like, good luck. And there was no follow up on it. One of the articles I found was a different woman, or this woman who'd been studying bias for a really long time. And she did some training stuff with San Francisco or LA. Her name is Jennifer Hart. I'm probably
Oh,
not saying that right.
that's the one I read. The article that I read was her interview with Time Magazine. So, like, I
Nice.
read her too. She won the MacArthur Genius Grant,
Yeah,
same,
she,
same as Miss Octavia Butler that we talked about last time.
And it was
um,
Oakland Police Department, Oakland.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So one of the things, instead of just like going in and like doing their training and being like, you guys are terrible and leaving, they spent time with the police department. And one of the things that I read about was they changed their foot pursuit policy. And so they stopped following people down blind alleys, and they're meant to, like, instead of just running after them, like call for backup, set up a perimeter, like have a plan instead of just running in. And that has reduced the number of shootings and injuries by a lot. It says dramatically, so I'm gonna say a lot. And then the other one I think is really funny is that she helped out next door.
Yes, I
Um,
saw that too. It was like, you can't just say suspicious black person.
yeah. So apparently on Nextdoor, I used to be able, I've never used Nextdoor. I used to be able to type in whatever you want, but now you have to say, they created a checklist of people logging on had to specify suspicious behavior before describing appearance. Um, so that caused people to like take a minute and think about what they're about to say.
Right.
And that this says the incidence of racial profiling fell by more than 75%.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's a little bit of a disconnect. Like if you just go in and do training, that's not enough. But if you follow up with like these are the steps to take, that it seems to work a lot better.
Yeah. So I read her interview with Time, and I thought that was like, it mentioned the same things about like Nextdoor and things like that. And um, so when we talk about, so we're talking about the police in this instance, how your inherent bias can affect your view of the world and how quickly you shoot someone or whether or not people get good health care. So that's where inherent bias can be detrimental, right?
Mhm.
It's where your inherent bias hurts the people you're trying to help. And so I found like that, because inherent bias on its own isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? There are some snap judgments that you make that save your life. um, but it's when it affects society as a whole, right? When you shoot someone who's not armed, when you can't get a loan because you're black,
Mhm.
that's when inherent bias starts to affect society. And I thought that those things were really interesting because a lot of people in general, and I think especially um, white allies tend to, there's this, I'm not a racist. I'm not a
Mhm.
racist. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, like fine, cool, great, good job. um, but then you have to look into your inherent biases, right? Just not being a racist. And I think that's maybe where this like phrasing has come from. Like it's not enough to be not a racist. You have to address your inherent bias. And that's where the work comes. And that's what is difficult, right, about solving all of these problems is that everyone has inherent bias. And it doesn't make you a bad person.
Mhm.
You're growing up in our society in America and you're being fed this information, right? You go to the movies and all the heroes are white. And all the bad guys are minorities, right? You see that every time you go to the movies. It's starting to change, but that's something you see. And so you're absorbing all this information, right? You see on the news, and I don't know if Joe maybe can attest to this too, but I always know if I'm watching a news story, I can tell you right away if the suspect was white or black.
By the way that they're describing the crime, or
um, by the way they describe the suspect, if in the first like the first time they report it, they talk exclusively about like neighborhood and like height and description, I'm like, all right, definitely a white guy. Definitely a white guy. Totally a white guy. They didn't mention hoodies. They didn't mention, like these things. They didn't mention these things. And I'm like, it's a white guy. And usually, and this has been my observation, in the first 24 hours, they will tell you if he's black. And it'll be past the 24-hour mark when you find out it's a white guy. Pay attention to the news. Watch it. I don't know, Joe, have you seen that or have you noticed that?
Oh, you'll know if they're black immediately because they're gonna tell you. You know, I mean that's just it. Within the first minute, three black males armed and dangerous on the loose. Watch out for this, that, or the other. Whereas there's been a rash of incidences
Yep.
where purses have been coming up missing at certain locations on patios or whatever. If you may have seen something suspicious or out of the ordinary, please contact the local police department or what have you. But yeah, on that note, yeah, they're going to tell you if they're black or if they think they're black. Just yeah,
Right away.
that's easily perceptive in the vocabulary that a news journalist or news anchor will provide for you pretty consistently.
Yeah. And so you're being fed this, right? If so, you're being fed this information from the news. You're being fed this information from the media. You are you're seeing it play out politically, you know. So your brain is being fed all of this information, which is not accurate, as we've learned through our discussions on crime, likelihood of who's committing crime and who's being arrested, right? We know that there's no propensity for like black people to commit more crimes than white people, but black people are arrested more often. Black people are arrested more often because they're seen, right? If you stop and frisk every black person, of course you're going to find drugs on some of them. You would also find drugs on white people if you stop and frisk every white person you saw.
And statistically, you would find them more often on white people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's where your inherent, well, I guess I want to say, like, that's how we get our inherent biases. And even like some things that I was reading were like, black people are not immune because we're seeing all of this information too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably a huge reason that there's like black on black crime and like black culture has this whole division in it because we're absorbing all of this information also, right? And it's detrimental to us and like who we are as people and what we think about ourselves. So I think it's really important to address your bias and find out ways to make it better. Right? Like, what can you do? Let's talk about that. How can I make my bias better? How can I not?
And this is also like when you were talking earlier about allies, there's the actions speak louder than words kind of idea behind this. And so if you have thoughts of, so like one of my things is like, I think women are terrible drivers. And I like, it just pops in my head when I see someone crazy on the road and I'm not doing it consciously, but it does pop up. I just drove like, I just did a road trip. So it came up a lot. That's probably why I'm thinking about it. So, but like if A, you correct the thinking about that, and then B, like your actions don't reflect that, you know? When you're not like turning to the person next to you and saying, did you see her? She's such a terrible driver. Women are awful or whatever. Like you're not spreading that and you're fixing your own thinking. And I think it's also that actions really speak volumes when it comes to this kind of thing.
Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on like how bias affects society, or like what you've read or discovered about like how you can change your bias?
So I did that thing again where I got totally absorbed in like what y'all are talking about. So I guess the first thing I'll just say is like I do the exact same thing with like it's a specific kind of bad driver and like Craig and I were talking about it earlier. It was like people who are like overly cautious and therefore dangerous. I always am like it's either a lady or it's an old white guy, like or just an old person, like because they're like overly cautious. Part of that comes from the fact that when I do stupid stuff, I'm being overly cautious. But I was like, you know, there are also like when I see someone driving too fast, I'm like, that is definitely a dude.
Oh yeah.
So
Guilty.
It also doesn't help when we
Craig.
perpetuate our own stereotypes, like,
Right.
So what was I thinking? I guess So I linked to a This American Life episode that it was from 2015, which is kind of great. Like I liked going back, and I did not have time to listen to it. It was a 2-part episode. And it's specifically about cops and inherent bias. So it's like a little more niche, but that's the thing, is like there are a lot of lessons that I think you can still extrapolate. But just reading through it, because I was looking for a specific story that this one guy told that I think really like pinged, is what really made me remember this episode, because he was in, I think it sounded like, so when they first started doing some like bias training, there was a department in Las Vegas that was willing to like do the training and like follow the suggestions and really like be conscious of it. And there's this one guy who like he learned that stuff in class and like was able to relate it to something that had happened to him before. But yeah, something like, to go back to definitions and that sort of thing. I found the quote that I think is also really, I guess, helpful from that perspective. He said, having a bias isn't being sexist. It's none of those things. Biased is, maybe I've stopped 3 or 4 guys that look exactly like this man, and every time I've stopped them, I found guns or dope on them. So you just put the trait from the person that was guilty onto the person that's innocent, which makes total sense. And so he was saying, like, after all of this, after realizing that, like, in a previous situation, he got shot because he gave a woman the benefit of the doubt, because he just assumed she wasn't involved in the shooting that was going on. So it's like, it's not helpful to anyone. But I think, and I lost it. Well, but yeah, the point is like he consciously goes into things now, like any situation, with the total, like, as open a mind as he can conjure, like, because he is one of the people who really gets it. But I don't think, like, a lot of people don't really get it. And so that one article about like whether it's about how, like, it seems to change people's understanding, it changes people's minds, but it doesn't really change their actions. But it's like that was a pretty balanced article, I think, because there were a lot of points, like, you don't have to have specific training to become a trainer, like, there's no, like, yeah. Yeah, that's the NPR article. Like, there's no certification to make you, like, able to train people in bias. Yeah.
I think it's like, it is fairly new, but also like,
yeah.
Like,
well, some of that stuff,
at least like a degree in psychology.
Yeah, that was kind of my thing. It's like that seems like the basic. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of think it's more complicated than that for like training large amounts of people and stuff. But and there was like a quote in that article. It was like, well, like, it's not showing up in the research, but we believe it's working. And I was like, so just because, like, you didn't cite any reason that it's working, you just were like, well, we think it's working. But all of that being said, I do think introducing it to people, getting them to think about it, 1, probably is not a quick fit. Like, it's not going to work right away. And 2, it's probably good, especially if you have like required training periodically, to kind of make people relate, like, the concept of bias to what they're doing in the real world. Might act like over time, it probably is beneficial on some level, I hope. I know it's beneficial for me, like, to really keep thinking about stuff.
That's the tricky thing, I think, about inherent biases, is that you don't notice them. And so I think you're right. It's sort of, you have to keep working on it.
Yeah.
Or have someone like help you, like point it out to you, or attend seminars and just keep thinking about it, because that's the tricky thing about them is you don't realize you're doing them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in that is it has to start somewhere. So, like, for instance, in many a black family, let's say going back to the 1900s, you probably came generation after generation after generation of having a very basic education, say maybe sixth grade level or something of that nature. Probably didn't graduate high school, really didn't have any college aspirations because you have to go out there and work and provide and deal with all the issues of that time. But as things advanced and stuff like that, you get better, and now everybody has the opportunity to go to college, graduate, become, you know, functioning, productive person. I think the same thing can be said at the law enforcement level, political level, or otherwise. The more training they have, the more that goes down to the people coming after them, to see these people making efforts. And then they go through the training and have, hopefully, even before they've taken an office or whatever, have lessened any bias or sought to explore what their inherent biases are, get training on top of that will benefit. And you just kind of stack it up and stack it up. Nothing of this nature, progress is not overnight, as we all know.
Right. Yeah, definitely. We're not going to wake up one day and be like,
yeah.
Right.
But it does,
I actually wanted to go back, if I can, just to present a statistic, and then there was something, if I can remember it, because I've been listening to everybody's conversation. One statistic, going back to what you were talking about, Megan, which is, and it goes back to you as well, Micah. You were talking about the young lady Everhart, or
I believe so. I think it's Eberhard.
that's how you say it?
something of that nature. I know that's in the vicinity. In Oakland, before they continued on and took the changes, implemented the changes on how they interacted with the community, 60% of all their pullovers and arrests were in the black community, which only accounts for 28% of the population of the area. 60% of the arrested stopped. 28% of the population.
Right.
And a lot of that, based on inherent bias and stereotypes, all those things, whether learned at a young age or through what they see on a daily basis and what the media feeds into it, as well, as you were stating, Megan. I remember, based on the media. As far as inherent biases go, and on the racial spectrum, let's just keep it there or what have you. The white society is able to act on an individual basis because they don't have to deal with these some of these the way people interact with black people or minorities, whereas as a cultural, you kind of have to identify with it together. You know what I mean? As I went off before, I worry about some of my sister's children because they look black, and maybe somebody's inherent bias may take their life one day because they don't see a human, they see a gun that isn't there or what have you. And I feel like the Ferguson thing, and anytime the George Floyd and all that stuff, I feel that because that could be me, or that could be somebody sees one of my daughters, in that way, even though they're light, but they dark enough to in somebody's inherent bias mind, and so that really kind of struck me as, I never thought about it like that, but it is kind of a privilege to be able to operate individually and not have to worry about these things or think about those things from that perspective of that could be my family member or what have you, whereas in the black community you identify with that across the board. And just my perception of the inherent bias when doing research, I found a lot, if not the majority of it, all the positive aspects seem to be across the board, but a lot of the negative aspects seem to be dealing with uh, police, white police and black police of that nature, but police, political people in authority dealing with minorities more than other, like educators, for instance. When you were talking about, oh, I'm not racist. Our white allies love you, but especially like a white teacher maybe fighting the good fight and doing things in the community and making things better to what their degree of better would be, but not really knowing the black community the way they think they do, and then the punishment from white, black, Mexican, Asian, or otherwise, is going to vary depending on how they perceive it. Well, if the black kid does it, it's a problem. If the white kid does it, it's just an outburst or what have you. Depending on it's
No.
varying across the board.
Yeah, I think that's a really, like, you made a really good analogy there, and I think it's something worth noting in race relations, especially when we're talking about allies, right? So I read this article a long time ago, and this is only sort of related, so sorry. Well, I mean, it's related. I read this article about, you guys remember when Bob's or Tom's, like, they're not as big now, but like
The
when they were
shoes, yeah.
like
Yeah.
Toms, and everybody bought Toms, and you bought Toms, and they gave away to a child in Africa who didn't have shoes, and that was a huge thing, right? Oh, we're doing this great thing. We're buying these shoes, and we're giving free shoes to children in Africa. And then I read this article where they go, right, to where they're giving these free shoes away, and giving free shoes away is taking away from local merchants who make shoes, and it's not helping the community. And the guy they spoke with was very like, they're kids, like, you give them a free pair of shoes, like, they don't realize like the effect. They're just happy to get another pair of shoes, right?
Yeah, but the impact is huge.
But the impact is huge. And I think, like you were saying, Joe, like, sometimes when an ally comes in to help, if you're not helping in the right way, you can be more detrimental to your group than you intend to be. And I think that's where, like, doing your research and all of those things come into play. And I think as far as like getting over bias or like helping to remove your bias, education is like the biggest part of that, right? Like, the more you learn about a group and a society and history and like the things that we talk about, the more aware you are of your bias. I think. Like, the more I learn about things, the better I am, right? When you know better, you do better. To quote myself from like a million videos and everybody else. So let's talk about our tests. So a couple of us took an inherent bias test on race, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want to put it all out there. That's fine. But let's just talk. You can tell me whether or not you were surprised if you took the test. You can tell us what you got, or tell us if you were shocked.
I think I would. Well, so I took a test that was like, do you have a preference specifically for white faces or black faces? Was the concept. And so the idea is that they show you pictures of black people and white people, and you have to sort them, and then good words and bad words, you have to sort them, and then a combination, and then they like flip the combination, right? So the idea is that the longer that you pause to associate a good word with a black person, or if you missort and associate a bad person with a black person, then that is showing your bias against black people. This is a basic rundown. And I think the interesting thing about those tests is like we're really complex people, and so you can take that test 20 times and get 20 different results and different variations. And also, like, if you play sorting games, it's kind of easy. And I play a lot of brain games, which so it felt a little bit like cheating. So I feel like my result was that I preferred black faces over white faces, not by a lot, by like a small margin. And I feel a little bit like it's a game, and I just gamified it. But I think the point of that test is to get people thinking. And if they have enough information, they can aggregate up this like huge amount of information. But about you specifically, it's not gonna tell you that you're racist or that you're not racist. It's it can't do that. But I think it's a really good tool to get conversations starting. And if my friend took it, and he was really upset by his results because he was like, I don't feel this way. And I was like, you don't. But the fact that like we can have this conversation now is the good that's coming out of it.
Yeah. How about you, Elizabeth?
So I took it first on my phone. Like, so it gives you an option for like a touchscreen or a keyboard because it's different. And so my result was that I slightly prefer black people. But there were a couple of answers where like it's like it took two answers, or like it thought I had touched the screen when I didn't, and so it was like I'm fine with this result, but I was like, let me take the keyboard version too, and I did that, and then it said I had a slight preference for white faces. However, there are also more questions when you take it, like that don't get they aren't anywhere in the touchscreen test. And so I think that they're using that information too. So I wanted to go back and like decline those questions and just do the matching thing, but I didn't have a chance. But yeah, and I like looking through it too, it's like this is also like depending on what you have been talking about or thinking about or how tired you are, like your answers can vary a little. It says, do not use this test to make any important decisions. But yeah, there's part of me too, though, that's just like, well, like, it's not like I'm a little disappointed in myself, but only because I feel, yeah, it's like it doesn't align with how I consciously feel. But it kind of makes sense too. It's like I've grown up around a variety of people, but my whole family is white.
Yeah.
And like I also did like the age one, and I got two completely different answers on the touch screen and on the computer on the desktop. But that was another thing. I was like, well, okay. I had a really hard time because I was like, when I think of old people, I think of like the dudes in the store who won't wear a mask and stand there and breathe on everything. But I also think of like my grandma, who is one of like the nicest people to me. So like it's hard because, and I think I might have gotten in both cases into like a little overthinking trap where like, because yeah, I also like I purposely didn't read the associations on the race one so that I like could be as like uninformed as possible, but I kind of got it. Like when I did get my second result and I read through, I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I assumed. But yeah, I would say like the total benefit to that is that yeah, I have some confirmation that like I have some bias, probably depending on, you know. I think it's upsetting to me because I do feel like my personal association should be to generally slightly prefer Black people anyway, because like I just like generally I don't have that many friends, but the people I have liked working with the most. The people like 2 of the 3 friends that have stuck around for like my adulthood when I can't make friends. Like, I feel like that should align with the reality that I live. But yeah, I mean, I also grew up in America, so, and in Texas.
But I think bringing up your family is a good point, because there's also this idea of like the faces that you first see as a child. You're able to pick out differences in that race, and so there's that stereotype of like all Asian people look the same, because you're not surrounded by whatever race. And I think there's also that bias that's like you're a child and you don't even realize. It's not exactly a bias, but it is in a sense. I think so.
That was surprising to me because I never had that ever.
I think I don't know how come it is. I didn't look into that too far, but there was like Hart told a story about
when she went to school.
She went to school and she was like the only Black girl there, and she was nervous, and all of her white I was like coworkers, students were really excited, but she had to like figure out how to tell them apart, which I think was interesting. But the other story that she told that I really liked was that in Oakland, California, I think this is in like the mid 2000s, a gang of Black teenagers caused a mini crime wave of purse snatchings among middle-aged women in Chinatown. When the police caught the teens and asked them why they went to that neighborhood, they said that the Asian woman, when faced with a lineup, couldn't tell the brothers apart. So they were like playing into that idea of like we all look the same to them and they can't pick us out.
Interesting.
And the more exposure you get, like if you go to a school that's really well integrated, that you get better at that. But if you grow up in a white neighborhood for your entire life, apparently it becomes difficult.
Or a Black neighborhood.
Sure.
So I also took the test. I only took it once. My result was that I don't have any particular bias. And I was like, bam!
You're equally like white and Black faces.
Yeah, it's like, don't take it again. That's the one you want.
I have no preference. Apparently, according to the test. And again, like time, day, what you're thinking about. I'm a slow reader, and so I feel like that maybe plays into it. Is that like it takes me the same amount of time to like read, and because I'm a slow reader, because I hear everything in my head when I read. And I feel like maybe that plays into it. Like because I'm a slow reader, my brain has time to process and like make the right choice every single time. But I did do a little happy dance, especially because in the past year I've been accused of being a racist.
You should send that, like take a screenshot and send it to those people.
just
Harvard told me.
Harvard, like, I'm not.
Oh, well, you know, they're just elitists anyway. So.
But I did think it was really interesting, and like we've been talking about like how does this training correlate to action, and how can you do better? And one of the things that Hart, sorry, I'm so sorry, we're butchering your name. I apologize if you come across this on the internet. I'm so sorry. If you know how to say her name, write it down below so that we cannot screw it up anymore. I'm super sorry.
I think it's Eberhart. I think you got it right. Yeah.
So one of the things that she was saying
you guys all froze.
That like slowing down, that's really how you, and like she said with the next door thing and with the police chases, like if you can avoid putting yourself in a situation where you have to make a snap judgment, then you're less likely to make the wrong judgment, which I think is true of everything in life. When you're under pressure and you have to make a snap judgment, you're going to go back to that, that part of your brain that like, what's the safe thing, right?
That's kind of good life advice.
Yeah, which is, yeah, exactly. Good life advice in general. Like, take a moment. Um, and I think like the more you can program yourself to like just take a step back and to think about it, then the more aware you are of it, right? Because then maybe you start to make different changes. You start to make other changes, and you're taking your inherent bias from your unconscious to your conscious brain, and that will affect your unconscious brain. And you can unlearn it, right? That's
Mhm.
how you unlearn things is by stopping and looking and evaluating and doing
Mhm.
it consistently. That's how you unlearn behavior. So I think that that was really interesting to me. And sort of when I read that, I was like, that's probably why I did so well on the test because I personally feel like that's what I do with people a lot of the time.
Mhm.
I'm like I do make snap judgments. I'm not gonna lie. I do it all the time. Um, I do have a tendency though to be like, well, this is Micah's friend. I'm gonna give him a chance. He's like an asshole. I'm gonna give him a chance.
That's like the sort of the fair thing to do. Be like, I have the judgment about you, but I'm gonna wait and see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Maybe I'll be wrong.
maybe I'll be wrong. And I think that's um, I've seen a lot on Facebook since the election from Trump supporters, not the total nut jobs, like the ones who were still sad. I've seen a lot on my Facebook of like, well, we'll see. I'm like, okay, well, you can't say it like that because you're
No.
not really. You have to have an open mind. It can't be a we'll see with a smirk and I know I'm right. It has to be a like open my mind. We'll see what happens. Right? Open my mind. I'm open to you changing my opinion of you or show, whatever, rather than a we'll see with a smirk and an eye roll. I feel like. Anybody else?
On that note, I let them be because when uh, when the resident was in office, I was you'll see with a smirk and an eye roll. You know what I'm talking about? And I was not open minded, and I feel like I was proven right. But uh, not to gloat or anything, and not to make this political in any way or whatever, but I am also the same. We'll see, but that's my inherent bias that of my own making of not trusting politicians and the way it's worked out. And the more educated I become, the less I trust them even more. Now it's just like I'm just good on my own. Let me just pay my taxes and y'all just stay the heck away from me. Uh, but in that regard, I think this was a good research effort on all of our part, and each and every topic we choose, I learned something more about my thought processes and about myself. And Megan, you know me. Y'all are getting to know me. I ain't gonna lie. I ain't trying to change. I like who I am. I ain't gonna lie to y'all. The reason why I didn't do the test because I'm an equal opportunity hater. People make me upset, and I don't like y'all. I like y'all, but general public, I probably don't
People,
like.
yeah.
If you see me in traffic, I'm probably doing all the stuff that you expect, and I would wish you would ludicrous my way, please. But that being said, no, I'm cool with who I am, and I'm making little changes or whatever. But I think like going on the facial recognition, depending on community and stuff like that. I had a white daddy and a black mama, so I just learned to pay attention. You know what I'm saying? I grew up in a black neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? But I just learned to pay attention. You know what I mean? To look at people, features and characteristics. You know what I mean? Uh, it was a byproduct of that, a good byproduct.
Yeah. Look, I would
Mhm.
say I learned the same thing living in New Orleans because there's so many shades.
Oh yeah,
Not living, but as a young child, that's where I spent my summer. There's so
right.
many shades.
I
you
think
you learn to pay attention to that stuff really quickly when
Oh yeah,
like
when
you
I
say when
my
you're
growing up
surrounded by it.
was total black. Being in Marshall, Texas, now it's a lot more diverse in Marshall. But when I grew up, it was like where the whole town was basically black. You saw white people. What? Out of place, ain't you? Like me and my sister were the whitest out there for a long time. You know what I mean? And but still, it never really, like, one way or the other didn't do anything for me to feel one way. I've never been a racist person. I don't know. I didn't think I had that option. It's like my dad's white, my mama's black. It's like you just have to love everybody. That's kind of how I rationalize it in my head. I don't have the option to hate people since I am people. It's like a little bit of everything, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
I wonder about how that is like ancestry or other like DNA things are affecting the way people look at race. I really hope it makes people ask questions. Probably not, but I think it would. Maybe we should do an episode about that.
Should we all get our DNA test done?
I already got mine done a long time ago.
Oh, yeah, I've done mine.
I got the black side. I got the matriarchal from a cousin, but obviously, the matriarchal thing is going to be the same because we both, my mom, and her mom are sisters, so they got the same stuff. So I know the matriarchal side. I don't know the patriarchal and.
Well, I just mean I wonder if that is affecting people or causing people to look at themselves and their biases and how they think about race. Like, if you get your test back and you're like, what?
Yeah, no, I heard. So when Craig and I did ours, his was much more interesting than mine. My genes essentially are like, you had a grandparent born in Europe, right? I'm like, no, not at all. But also This American Life. I remember hearing an episode about genetic testing and how like it can have unintended consequences, and that like one of the guys they followed thought he was black. His whole family like thought they were black, and when he did his DNA, he was married to a black woman, and like when he got his DNA back, he had zero African DNA at all. Like it was a bunch of different it was a mix, but like it really messed up his life and like the way he saw himself and the way his wife saw him. And like I don't remember, and it may have been up in the air when they did the episode, like what exactly, like how it concluded. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting too, and how disappointing to be on, like, to think where you're coming from, and you have like it's even more, because we all, I think, are like hoping it'll be something interesting that we didn't know about, but like, yeah, what if it's something that's not even something you considered? Yeah.
I saw that in a different connotation. Whites, kind of racist guy or what, there's none of that floating in my blood. I'm pure as can be. And, lo and behold, about 8 to 12%. And he was like, nope, they got the wrong thing. And it was like when you're surprised of an inherent bias that you didn't have.
Right.
It's so surprising that you just bury it because you don't want to acknowledge it. That's not you. Oh, yeah, he was in complete denial to the point where they paid for him to do it 4 more times. Different genealogical, different databases, like there's Ancestry, and then there's the
23andMe, and there's a bunch of them.
But they basically did the 4 major ones that were out there, and all of them came back anywhere from 5 to 12%. There was, the ratios are a little bit off or whatever, but he had African genealogy, and finally it was like reverse Clayton Bigsby, but he had to come to accept it. You know what I'm saying? Like Chappelle Show, and it was, I think, hilarious.
Yeah.
But, for him, it was very, he had to come to terms, if you will, so to speak, and Yeah, probably made him a pretty poor racist.
Mhm.
All right, I'm sorry. I feel like I got us off topic. But so I feel like we're done. Any last thoughts on inherent bias from the peanut gallery? I'm kidding. You guys aren't. None of you are. Not even you guys out there watching.
Yeah, I think that the takeaway is like everyone has biases, whether you're aware of them or not. It does not make you a bad person.
Mhm.
And it's totally fascinating to read about. So there's going to be some articles. I'll also put a link to the Harvard test that we were talking about if you're curious. There are several different, like a dozen different ones. You go nuts, do all of them.
Mhm.
Let go. Look. I say I also, if you haven't been on the Facebook page, or if you go to the Facebook page after this, the link is there also on the Facebook page for the test that I took, the Harvard one. Elizabeth, Joe, final thoughts, words of wisdom, nuggets of knowledge.
Nuggets.
So like, yeah, I love the concept of bias because I feel like it's the first baby step towards, I mean, it's like, yes, we all have it. Everybody has it. It's part of being human, but I feel like it should be the first Yeah, about that one thing. Yeah, I feel like it should be the first baby step for white people who like like they can't do the work because they can't even, it's so impossible to them that they could make any sort of judgment on anyone based on what they see. That, and the other thing I was gonna like, there hasn't been a place to share it, so I wanted to share my favorite example in my life of inherent bias that I very recently learned I had, but I think it's not related to people, and I do think like this is why it's so fascinating and such a good example of what bias is. My kid came with, I don't even remember which it was, a rhombus or a trapezoid piece, and I like at my mom's house, and like I was like, oh, that's a trapezoid, or is it a rhombus? I don't know. I was like, I don't know why I get those two confused. Like they don't sound alike, they don't really look alike. And my mom was like, those are in the same drawer in the Montessori classroom. Like those two shapes are in the way that work is set up. It's like you pull out drawers and they have like various shapes. You trace them, you learn what they're called. The rhombus and the trapezoid are in the same drawer. I've always associated them together, but I never knew why. And it's some tiny thing that happened when I was 5. So,
All right, how about you, Joe?
Everybody's got inherent biases, and it's good to be aware of your own. Black, white, or indifferent, it'll make you a better person. Do the knowledge and study yourself.
yep.
So I just had a final thought while we were talking about this. Um, so we are talking about our brains and categories, and I was like, oh, inherent bias and the what are you? Like, what is your race? What is your ethnicity? What are you? Like those that is where that's where that question comes from. My brain is trying to put you in a category and I can't figure it out based on looking at you. So I'm going to ask. So maybe I'll be a little nicer when people ask that, although it's still a pretty rude question.
Still don't
Never.
touch my hair.
Don't ever phrase it. What are you? Just
Yeah.
nice.
Where your parents come from? No.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to our episode on bias. We will see you next time. And please remember, don't be a racist and wash your hands.